Welcome to Straight Up Paleo, where we talk all things nutrition straight up. I'm one of your hosts, Christina Rice. I'm a holistic health coach and a nutritional therapy practitioner in training currently living in Los Angeles. I'm also the creator of the health and wellness blog addictedtolovely.com and the host of the Actually Adultish podcast.
And I'm your other host, Kara Halderman. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner from Dallas, Texas, creator of careaboutit.com, and co-host of the Low Carb Conversations podcast. In this podcast, we will be discussing all things paleo, health, and nutrition, along with answering questions straight from you.
If you want to submit a question for us to answer on the podcast, head to straightuppaleo.com or email us at straightuppaleo@gmail.com.
Remember our disclaimer. The materials in this podcast are only to be used for advice and are not to be used in place of general medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
If you want to support the show, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and a review on iTunes. Enjoy the show! Hey, Kara.
Hello. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Happy first Thursday of December.
Jeez, that makes me so happy.
So happy. Do you have any big December plans?
I mean, besides just Christmas in itself being Christmas, no, I'm just forcing my boyfriend to go do all the Christmassy things with me, like lights, looking at lights. We have really great lights in Dallas, and they did something in our Dallas zoo where they put lights all over, so at night the zoo turns into like a light show basically. I'm gonna force him to do that with me. I just decided I'm going all out for Christmas and doing all the Christmas things, like baking gingerbread cookies, sugar cookies, decorating.
Oh my gosh, yes. Next year, I want to come visit you during that time so we can do all the Christmas things together.
Yeah, we have to. Are you doing anything for Christmas? Big stuff?
I'm always a Christmas person. Right now, I'm struggling because I don't really have anyone. It's hard living alone during Christmas season because I'm used to always having somebody either in my house or in my apartment with me to like watch movies with and decorate with. So I gotta like force people to hang out with me. But I'm actually really excited because I am gonna go home for a whole week around Christmas, and like it gets really amped up because we have insane lights over there. So that's my favorite thing. Yeah, it'll be super, super fun. Plus I'm looking outside and it's so sunny here still in LA. It does not feel like Christmas at all.
Because it's like hot.
Yeah, it's hot and warm.
Jeez.
But the good news is 25 Days of Christmas is on. So my spirits are up.
What channel is that on?
Freeform.
ABC
Family.
Oh.
Freeform is the dumb new name for it. It's fine.
I need to check that out. I'm just way too into Hallmark movies. I've seen them all, but I love the Christmas Hallmark movies.
They're so good.
They're
that's why I'm deprived right now because I don't have access to Hallmark because I don't have cable. So I got to work with what's on the internet.
Oh, geez. The internet.
The struggle is real, but yeah, it's a good month. My favorite month of the year.
And I just have to say, okay, so I hope you guys listened to our last episode with Mind Pump. I listened to it obviously because I wasn't in it. And I just have to give a shout out to that episode because I thought it was so good and so funny. Like, I thought it was hilarious. Those guys are so funny. And this morning I was actually putting up a Christmas tree in my office and I was binge listening to Mind Pump because I love them. They're too funny. It's almost like comedy in a way.
I cannot get enough of them. I was saying this the other day. I never re-listen to my own podcasts. I don't like hearing my voice, so I listen when I edit and I don't listen again. But I have listened to that episode so many times just because they crack me up so much. And like I said, the first part is going to be on Actually Adultish. Probably the following week once this episode comes out. So everybody should stay tuned for that other part because it's a funny one. And it's a really good episode too. So the Mind Pump guys just kill it every time. I love them.
Seriously, they do. I can't get enough right now. So if you haven't listened to our episode yet, go to our last episode because it was really, really good. And
Yes.
just, I mean, I'm a host, but I liked listening to it from a bystander point of view. So,
Yay.
yeah.
But speaking of incredible guests that we adore, today's guest is amazing, and I can't stop smiling because I'm so excited for everybody to hear this interview.
Yeah. Her name's Amy Berger.
Yes, Amy Berger. She's incredible. She runs the blog tuitnutrition.com, but she has her master's in human nutrition, and she's a certified nutrition specialist and a certified NTP like Kara and like I will soon be. She is a wealth of knowledge, like insane. Kara and I are obsessed with her blog and everything she has to say. She gives a lot of really great scientific evidence, and she has a ton of experience in working with her own nutrition clients. And I just love that she's not afraid to say her opinion. She doesn't just go with what the trends are or what the crowd's saying. She has like legitimate reasons for why she has the opinion she has. So I love that.
Yeah. She's a definition of DGAF. And it was great. We had a really good conversation, really good interview. I think she would call herself a low carb nutritionist, maybe. I hope that would be the term. But we talk a lot about low carb versus keto. And then we just go, you know, how we like to get really specific into things and just rapid fire questions about low carb and keto, what the differences are. We talk about protein, we talk about carbohydrates. It was just an awesome conversation, and we admire how she was not afraid to give her opinion and just give cookie cutter advice like a lot of people do. So that's why we had her on.
Yeah, and I have to thank her for putting up with all of our interrogation questions because we can be intense interviewers. We just like to go for it. So shout out to her for nailing it.
Yeah, she really took all those questions. So, you know, if you've been interested in a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet, this is probably the episode for you because you'll probably figure out if you really need to go full keto or if you can have some leeway, or we talk a lot about macros as well. So this would be a good episode for you to listen to. And other than that, it was just a really great chat.
Yeah, and you guys, she has, again, an incredible website, tuitnutrition.com, and she has a great book, The Alzheimer's Antidote, and that's on Amazon, but all the information about her you can find in the show notes, and yeah, it's going to be great. So we really think that you're going to love this. We know you will, and I think without further ado, let's just hop into the interview.
Hi, Amy. How's it going?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Christina and I are really pumped to have you on the show today. We heard you on our friend Sean Miner's podcast, and we loved what you had to say. Then we found your blog, and we were binge reading it, and we loved all of your information. So thanks for coming on our show, and I know our listeners are going to love to hear what you have to say.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate you reading the blog. I love to hear that people find it useful, or not useful, but entertaining at least.
Yeah, entertainment is key. So how about you tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you do, and kind of how you got to where you are today and what you're doing in the nutrition space?
Sure. Well, my story is pretty similar, I think, to a lot of people's out there in that for most of my young adult life, I did what I thought were all the right things to lose weight. You know, I was a chubby kid and I was a chubby teenager, and I was chubby despite lots and lots of running. You know, I've completed 2 marathons, lots of whole grains in my diet, always using margarine instead of butter. You know, I thought I was doing all the right things, and yet no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't get rid of that weight. And I was very fortunate in that I didn't really have any major health issues, but I was always carrying more weight than I felt like I should be in light of my diet and exercise. And I spent a very long time feeling like a failure and beating myself up and feeling like it was my fault and just with really, really terrible self-esteem about my body image. And eventually I stumbled across low carb eating strategies, and it just, it made sense to me because after so many years of working a certain paradigm and it's not getting me results, something had to be wrong. Something wasn't adding up. And the way low carb works, the way it sort of reprograms your metabolism just made sense to me. And I figured I had nothing to lose. And even though it was terrifying to use heavy cream in my coffee instead of skim milk or to put butter on my food, it was very scary, but lo and behold, it worked. And, I started out in this from a weight loss perspective, but over the years, and since I've now gotten formal education and training in nutrition, it's definitely evolved and expanded way beyond, helping people with fat loss. I mean, the other things that this way of eating is good for, it's weight loss is like the least impressive thing that this does. When you look at cardiovascular disease and diabetes and, PCOS and all the other issues that this diet is very good for, fat loss is like, oh yeah, and by the way, it also helps, it also helps you lose weight. So now I'm a professional nutritionist, and I just try to help educate other people in how to implement this in their life.
Yeah, I love that. So how did you initially stumble upon the low carb way of eating?
I don't remember how exactly it happened, but the first thing that I read about this was actually the Atkins book. I think it was the 1992 version. I mean, there's a couple of different versions of his book, but I think it was the 92 version. I honestly think it was just laying around. I think my mother had gotten it at a used bookstore, or someone gave it to her, and it was just sitting there in the house. And I'm like, I'll flip through this. And I ended up reading it, and I said, whoa, this really makes sense. This is so crazy. It just might work. I'm going to give it a try. But that's how I stumbled into it. I mean, at that time, there were really many, many, many fewer forums and websites about this. I mean, at that time, the internet wasn't new, but it was really limited to like a couple of little chat rooms here and there that were talking about low carb. It wasn't like it is now, where it's everywhere and you go into a bookstore and there's entire shelves of low carb books. But that was my first intro. And I have to say, to be honest, maybe there's some people listening that this will resonate with. It was almost easier to get started with a low carb or ketogenic diet at that time because there was less information. So because there was less information, there was also a lot less confusion and a lot less contradictory information. You just did what the...
Yes, I'm so glad you're saying this.
Yeah, I read the book and I followed the plan to the letter as Dr. Atkins wrote it, and it was great. And I think for people that are new to it now, I don't envy the new people because it's so confusing right now.
It is. It's really, really, really confusing. There's like a million ways to do low carb or keto, and it's confusing. So would you consider yourself like low carb or ketogenic, and what are the differences?
Oh, thank you for asking, because this is such a huge pet peeve of mine. I myself consider myself to be a low carb eater. And what that means is every now and then, just by the natural consequence of what I'm eating or what I'm not eating, I do pop in and out of ketosis. But generally, I don't aim to be in a state of ketosis all the time. So my carbohydrate intake could vary from day to day. Some days it's 20 grams, some days it's 85 grams. Just depends on what I'm eating, what I'm doing. And I don't weigh and measure my food. I mean, there's a time and a place for that, but generally the difference between a low carb and a ketogenic diet is just the degree of carbohydrate restriction. And also, if you're following a very strict medically therapeutic ketogenic diet, you also do need to limit your protein a little bit. But for people whose main goal is fat loss, they don't need to be following a super, super strict ketogenic diet where they're, worried about how much protein they're eating and worried about staying in ketosis. I mean, this is such a huge issue right now in the keto and low carb community. I mean, most people can get where they want to go with low carb rather than actually being in ketosis all the time.
Okay. I want to dive into literally everything you just mentioned right there. But first, what I would love for you to talk about is a lot of people in the ketogenic community talk about low carb purgatory. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. So they make the argument that if you're sort of low carb but not ketogenic, that your body is sort of in this in-between state and doesn't know what to do when it's worse off for you.
And it's like destructive almost or something.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
I haven't heard it described as, low carb purgatory, but I think I know what you're describing. And I think there is some merit to that if you sort of are like halfway doing it. So, maybe you're still eating enough carbohydrates. So there's a difference between being in ketosis and being what we call fat adapted. You can be fat adapted, meaning you have a primarily fat-based metabolism. You're eating little enough carbohydrate that your body is forced to run on fat primarily as fuel, but your carbohydrate intake and your protein intake aren't so low that you have elevated ketones building up in your blood or being excreted in your urine. Like if you were to test your ketones, you don't have high ketones, but you have a fat-based metabolism. You are off the blood sugar and insulin roller coaster. Some people just feel better actually being in the state of ketosis all the time. They feel mentally sharper, their moods are better, they have more energy, and that's fine. Some people need that, but I do think a lot of people, it really varies how much carbohydrate somebody can consume and either still be in ketosis or still just be fat adapted. Some people can truly eat 80 to 100, maybe even 110, 115 grams of carbohydrate. And I still consider that low carb. I mean, that's certainly not ketogenic, but compared to a standard American diet that's super high in carbs, 100 grams of carbs is actually fairly low. The purgatory, I think, is it's a different level of carbohydrate for each person. And I think the problem is, and I see this all the time with people who are struggling with fat loss, it's when you are eating a very high fat diet, but you have a little bit of carb creep, or maybe you don't quite realize that you're still eating slightly enough carbohydrate to keep you out of that fat burning mode, whether or not you're actually in ketosis. So you still have a primarily carbohydrate-based metabolism, but you're eating gobs and gobs of fat. And that's why they have that abbreviation LCHF, low carb, high fat. I'm going to steal this from Dr. Ted Naiman, who's out of Seattle. He's a fabulous low carb physician. He says, pro tip, if your body is already high fat, then all you really need is the low carb, meaning you don't need, if your primary goal is fat loss, which is a different aim than using a ketogenic or low carb diet for some medical purpose. If your primary goal is losing body fat, you don't need to load your food up with gobs and gobs of oil and butter and put fat in your coffee in order to arrive at some kind of super high ratio of fat in your diet. You're better off getting a good amount of protein, keeping carbs very low, and using fat for flavor and for satiety, but not, going out of your way to consume a ton of fat.
Can you kind of elaborate on that for a little bit? Because there's two sides of the ketogenic spectrum here. Some people say just keep eating fat. It does not matter how much fat you eat. And then others say the opposite, that in order to lose weight, you have to kind of moderate your fat so your body can burn its own body fat. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or what are your reasonings behind that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I just think I hate to be so like wishy-washy, but if somebody's getting results by eating 80% fat or, drowning everything in fat, then that's great.
Right.
All that matters is whether you're getting the results that you want to get. Whether that means losing weight or getting rid of headaches or clearing up your acne, whatever the goal is you're trying to accomplish. If you're accomplishing it, then who cares how you're accomplishing it? Don't let the internet bros and the forum cowboys tell you that you're doing it wrong. But if you're not getting the results you want, and you've been told, hey, if you're hungry, eat more fat. If you don't feel well, eat more fat. But you're already eating 70 or 80% of your calories from fat. I don't know that more fat is the answer. And we just see this all the time. And it tends to happen more in women, but sometimes in men, because we've been made afraid of protein. So people are consuming lots and lots of fat because they're afraid to increase their protein intake. And they also think that they have to structure their ketogenic diet around these ratios, right? They get macros off some calculator on the internet and, I have to eat 80% fat So on, however many calories I'm allowed for the day, 80% of that is fat. And then you make up the rest with a little bit of protein and even, fewer carbs. And that just gets people into trouble. But again, I'm for whatever works. And if some people will find that they do feel best eating a ton of fat, but I just find that a lot of people don't, particularly when fat loss is the goal.
I would love for you to talk more about the protein amounts, because I totally agree. I think that sort of this culture has been created where people are just really afraid of protein. And I'm just wondering sort of like what you think is, do you see problems with people going too low protein?
I do. I don't see clinical, like there's this state called kwashiorkor, which is like a literal protein deficiency where your body is in a severe medical crisis because you are starved for protein. I don't see anything like that. But what I do see is, like I said, people are not losing fat when that's their goal. They are hungry. They're tired, they're moody, they have anxiety. And I just think that comes from literally still being hungry. Like they wonder, well, why am I still hungry? Well, because you're starving. You need more protein. You need more actual food coming into the body that's not just pure isolated fat. And we forget that protein is not just muscles. All the neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and all that thyroid hormone, they all come from amino acids that come from proteins. And so I think the reason that people have become afraid of consuming protein is that they've heard that too much protein will kick them out of ketosis or that it will turn into sugar. And that's a total misunderstanding of the biochemical processes at work there. And I maybe we can link in the show notes. I wrote like 2 blog posts about this because I get these questions all the time. And again, if somebody needs to stay in actual ketosis because of medical therapy, maybe that's for epilepsy or they're using it as an adjunct therapy for cancer or Alzheimer's or some other condition, that's different from somebody who just wants to use a low carb way of eating for overall health and for weight loss and for good energy. Most of those people don't need to be in an actual state of high ketosis all the time. So it doesn't matter if they consume enough protein to keep them out of ketosis. Again, like they can still absolutely be burning fat. They can still absolutely have a fat-based metabolism, even though they're not quote unquote in ketosis.
Wow, that's really interesting. And yeah, we'll definitely link your article in the show notes because I read that one last night and it is a really good read if you're wondering about the whole protein thing, but still kind of elaborating on protein. So do you have any like general guidelines of what too little and too much protein would be? Like, I know that there's this whole thing of moderate protein. So what does that even mean? And where would too little and too much come in?
Oh, what a great question. I don't know that there's an exact answer.
Right.
I like to base protein intake on somebody's actual body size. And some people will tell you it should be based on your lean body weight. So like get your body fat percentage. But to just make this easy for people, I think it's easier to just go off of your actual total body weight, whether that's in pounds or kilograms. Don't worry about the lean mass, but go by your goal weight. So like if you weigh 250 pounds, but your goal weight is 150, base your protein intake on 150. And what you could do is eat approximately 1 gram per pound of that, give or take. A little less is fine, a little more is fine. And most people, women especially, aren't eating anywhere near that much protein. They're
really
going with yeah, and I'm not saying everybody has to eat that much. I'm saying you can, and I think it's pretty effective for fat loss to be eating that much protein and cut back a little bit on the extra dietary fat. Because the protein, if you aim for and again, women especially, if you aim for that high amount, you're probably going to fall short, which is fine. So aim for that amount. And even if you just get in the ballpark, you're probably going to increase your protein over where you were before. So and how much is too much? It's almost impossible to eat quote unquote too much protein unless you are exclusively doing like shakes and bars where you're just mainlining liquid protein into your body. If you're eating pork chops and steak and chicken breast and tuna and salmon and elk and bison, it's really hard to eat too much.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have a question. So let's say somebody's eating about, like what you said, about a gram per pound of protein, and also a high fat diet, low carb, and they're still feeling hungry. Would you suggest them increasing protein or fat?
That's a good question. If they're eating 1 gram per pound of their body weight or their goal body weight, I don't know. I would probably say, I mean, if they're struggling to lose fat at that point, I would probably say to increase the protein even more, because they have done some studies where you can eat more than that, where they've done even 2 grams, or maybe it was 2 grams per kilogram. So maybe it's not pounds. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember offhand, because 2 pounds per kilogram, 2 grams per kilogram is different from 2 grams per pound. But either way, it's a pretty, generous intake of protein daily, and they don't gain body fat. So I would probably say to try to increase the protein, but I would also say if somebody's doing truly, truly a well-formulated low-carb diet with adequate protein, very low carbs, and they're still struggling with fat loss, and it's been a long time, a stall, people write to me all the time, like, I haven't lost weight in 2 weeks. What am I doing wrong? 2 weeks is not a stall. This is, for most people, this is a long-term process. It takes time. You will stall, you will plateau. That's totally normal. But if it's been a very long time and everything else looks good and it's a total mystery why someone is not losing weight, I would get the thyroid checked, and I would also look at some other hormones. But I would do a comprehensive thyroid panel to see if something isn't wrong there.
Okay, so thyroid. Let's go into that, because you have another good article on your blog about ketogenic or low carb diets and thyroid. So do you think it's, there are the two sides saying that ketogenic low carb diets make your thyroid more efficient, so you don't need as much thyroid hormone. And then there are other people saying that low carb and ketogenic diets just straight up down regulate your thyroid and can cause hormonal imbalances. So where do you stand in that argument?
I think there's so many people who have thyroid problems that actually get better when they do a low carb or ketogenic diet. So clearly it's therapeutic, at least for some people. But there have been, reports from people after being on low carb for a while where their thyroid kind of tanks. And I think that's not necessarily due solely to the absence of a lot of carbohydrate. I think that slowdown of thyroid and of metabolism happens on any diet where you have a very long-term extreme caloric deficit. So that's not necessarily low carb doing that. It's anytime you lose a very big amount of weight, I think that tends to happen. And we don't hear reports of this happening in women who start at 300 pounds. They don't have these kind of slowdowns. I think it's women that are already kind of small to begin with, and they just want to lose those last few pounds, and they eat very, very little food over the long term. So that's part of it. But the other thing that I think is important to kind of explore is when people have a decrease, whether it's in T3 or maybe it's, TSH goes up a little bit, but, still within normal ranges. My most important thing, and I'm not a physician, I'm just a nutritionist, so take this with a grain of salt. I am far more concerned with how somebody feels than with what the number is on a lab printout. So if somebody's T3 has gone down a little bit, but they feel great, then who cares? And in that case, it does seem like maybe it's low carb or whatever diet they're following that is making them more efficient, and their body is able to do everything it did before with a lower amount of T3. I don't know if we've proven that. It seems like there's a lot of interesting indications that that's the case. I can't say we know for sure, but I'm just so much more concerned with somebody being symptomatic versus asymptomatic. Like, do they have all the signs and symptoms of low thyroid? Do they feel like garbage, or do they feel great and their thyroid hormone just happens to be lower than we would expect, but they feel terrific?
Yeah, I was actually one of those people that I was pretty, I'm like a normal sized girl to begin with, and I wanted to do a ketogenic diet, and I went pretty strict ketogenic diet, and literally it's like after 8 months my thyroid just completely collapsed, and my hormone just like completely tanked. But I also, like you said, was not eating enough food. I was just not eating enough and like starving basically during the whole entire time. So that could be a really big factor for sure.
I think it is. And I think that would happen on any diet where that's the case, whether it's low carb or vegan or paleo or what. I think that would happen just from, it's the body's response to what is essentially long-term starvation, even though you didn't intend to do that.
Totally.
One other thing that I see is often mentioned in the ketogenic community, for instance, for people with thyroid issues, is the whole practice of carbing up, or a cyclical ketogenic approach, where maybe one or a few nights a week you're eating more carbohydrates. What's your opinion on the quote carb up practice?
I don't usually recommend it for people that are not athletes. I think athletes do best with that, but I'm not opposed to it. Again, like if somebody feels like that really helps them. And I think for most people, a weekly carb up, like one sort of starchy meal, is not really going to be a problem. And I know that's heresy, right? Oh my God, she's telling people to eat carbs. But again, even if short term that takes you out of ketosis, or like maybe you have to wait 12, 16 hours to burn through that glycogen, then once that's done, you're right back to fat burning mode. And if that does give someone more energy, or, they feel like they have fewer thyroid symptoms, then that's fine. But to be honest, I don't have a lot of experience with helping hypothyroid people do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just curious. So if you had a client who is doing a low carbohydrate diet, not necessarily ketogenic, and they're not feeling great, is there usually something that you first adjust? Because I guess, like going back to the carb ups, I find that that's commonly the recommendation is to try like a carb up, but it seems like maybe you would say adjusting the protein, or I don't know. Do you find like something that you commonly recommend?
I can't say there's a common recommendation. It's really individual. And it's when I really dig into that person's diet, whether they send me a food log or just walk me through a couple of days of their typical meals, I can usually pinpoint the problem. And it's most of the time, it's just plain old not enough food, not enough total food. Very often it's not enough protein. But yeah, usually it's that. Every now and then I do get someone who's either a lacto-ovo vegetarian. I don't get many vegans, but even if somebody's not a vegetarian, but they avoid like red meat and pork, sometimes I'll suspect either a B12, slight insufficiency, or like iron or zinc deficiency. So I can't say that there's any blanket recommendation, but usually it turns out to be just plain old not enough food.
Yeah. I see that a lot. Do you think that vegan keto or vegan low carb is like a good thing, or can it be done? I mean, it's a thing that's coming out now. People are vegan keto and they're just, shoving a whole bunch of nuts in their face and just eating like lettuce only. Do you think that's what would you do if somebody was vegan keto?
I want to say good compared to what? So is it good? It is probably a step up from a vegan diet where it's not like they're living on vegetables, they're grainitarians, right? They're living on pasta, they're living on bread, they're living on dates and like figs and all this sugar and starch and grain. If you do a vegan keto diet where you're eating a lot more avocado and olives and coconut, it's probably a step up, but I do think you are still going to have the same sort of issues that you'd have on a regular higher carb vegan diet, not right away, but over the long term, and the thing is though, I've had one or two people come to me who are vegans and are not willing to reintroduce meat, and I'll give them the best advice I can while saying, I don't think you're going to feel that great. You're not going to get the results you want. But if you really are unwilling to introduce meat, here's my advice on how to just make this the best it can be. I think, again, like trying to distinguish between ketogenic versus low carb, if you do low carb as a vegan, you're still going to have some issues, but when you do low carb versus actual ketogenic, that gives you a little more wiggle room for things like lentils and black beans. And at least you're going to get a little bit more protein and a little bit more like iron and zinc that are in those legumes. Again, I don't think it's optimal. I don't think it's better than an omnivorous low carb diet, but I don't want to, if people are really, really just not willing to introduce meat, then I still think you're probably better off doing a lower carb vegan diet than you are living on fruit and bread.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm seeing a lot, and it kind of relates back to this protein fear, is I'm seeing a lot of people in the keto space just going so low protein, and they're not vegan, but they seem to be vegan a lot of the time. Or you have people like Mark Hyman, who promotes a vegan approach, a paleo vegan, and using meat as like a condiment, he calls it.
That's a great term. I never heard that.
Yeah, it's funny, right? But I mean, and I'm seeing it with other people in the keto space, like doing, only having animal products a few times a week. I mean, what are your thoughts surrounding that? Like, where they're not vegan? I mean, do you see any problems with that, or what are your thoughts?
I think there's far fewer problems with that, because if you're getting even a little bit of animal protein here and there during the week, you're probably going to be okay. But it depends on the individual. If that individual is having signs and symptoms of anemia and zinc deficiency and other stuff, maybe they want to reconsider. But I'm just going to be really honest and really politically incorrect for a minute here. I am getting very tired of nutritional quote unquote experts and government authority bodies, especially, trying to demonize animal foods that have supported the health of healthy and long-lived and robust and physically fit people for thousands upon thousands of years.
Oh my God, I love you.
Yeah,
we've always eaten meat. We've always eaten red meat. We've always eaten beef. We've always eaten shellfish. We've always eaten poultry. And it is the nutritional arguments cannot even be made. They cannot even stand. It's so ridiculous to say that red meat causes diabetes or whatever. And even now, unfortunately, because the authorities know that those arguments don't have any legs, they are now moving toward the environmental argument, which is just as false. I've worked on farms. I've worked on small farms where there's nothing better for soil regeneration, for the health of the grass, than having ruminant animals, frankly, pooping and peeing all over the grass. That's nature's best fertilizer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm so tired of people dancing around like, oh, we don't really need red meat. It's bad for the environment. No, this has to stop, because people are not feeling well. They're anemic, they're B12 deficient, and they're raising their children this way. And I'm sorry, but it's a disaster.
I agree. I was just having a conversation on my other podcast, Low Carb Conversations, with Diana Rogers from Sustainable Dish. Have you?
Yes. Oh, she's great.
She's amazing. And we were talking all about that and about how the problem is not meat itself. It's just the way that we are raising meat and how we've, everyone knows, not everyone, but everyone in this nutrition space knows that, like, factory farming meat is worse for the environment. And, factory farming, quote unquote, vegetables, like these mass production of vegetables, can be even worse than the meat production, because they're just using insane amounts of fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides that is just killing everything in the soil. And it's just turning to like dirt and sand, and you're not rotating everything correctly, and it's like even worse for the environment to eat those types of things sometimes. So it's not like you were saying, meat itself. We've always eaten meat. It's just the way that we've industrialized it, which is insane. But kind of like going back in the day, talking about keto, there's this other argument that like our ancestors were always in this state of ketosis, and that's why most people advocate a ketogenic diet. So do you think that they were always in a state of ketosis, or were they more cyclical, like popping in and out?
Oh, I think, good question. I don't think everybody was always living in ketosis, because they weren't. Yeah. I shouldn't say that, right? I don't know for a fact.
Yeah, we don't know, but
it just seems illogical. But it also depends on where you lived, because everybody says, quote unquote, our ancestors. Well, if your ancestors lived in Polynesia, they had access to fruit all year long. You don't have winter. in the
Yeah.
Pacific Islands. It doesn't snow. They're not living on caribou and seal for 6 months of the year like they are in the Arctic. So it depends. I mean, I think there are different population groups around the world who were eating a high carb diet all year long. And there were different population groups that were eating a low carb diet. But certainly it doesn't seem like anybody, if people were on a low carb diet leaning toward being in ketosis most of the time, it wasn't because they thought that carbohydrate was harmful or that it was like going to make them sick. It was because that was just the nature of their environment. You can't eat a mango. Like the way that we eat now in the modern world, at least in the industrialized world, is only thanks to all this modern technology we have, that you can go to Whole Foods in Nebraska in January and buy bananas. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Or
That
like,
is so bizarre when you think about it.
yeah. So, but do I think everybody was in ketosis? No. I think some people, probably in temperate climate areas, probably did bounce in and out. Probably in the wintertime, they were more ketogenic. And then in the summer, they were kind of eating a lot more plants and a lot more fruit. And basically, like almost making themselves diabetic and having fatty liver in the short term, because then during fall and winter, it cleared out. It's like this ebb and flow that we no longer have. We live in constant summer, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have this theory that but they were getting into ketosis because they were like hungry. Like they were in
Yeah.
calorie restriction.
Yeah, it
Like they were
wasn't, they
starving.
weren't intending. They weren't like, oh, I need to be in ketosis. I shouldn't eat that potato. It's like, it just, no, you're right. It
That's so
happened
funny.
naturally, I think, by what was available in their environment.
Yeah, I agree.
One thing that I literally wrote down, something that was on your blog. You said, "Dear healthy, young, fit, lean, athletic people who do not feel well, please stop following a medically therapeutic ketogenic diet." And I love that you said that. And I would just love for you to talk a little bit more about who should and shouldn't be following a medically therapeutic ketogenic diet.
And what is a
Yeah,
medically therapeutic ketogenic
Yeah.
diet?
right. So this kind of goes along with what we've been saying about the difference between low carb and ketogenic, or being fat adapted and being in ketosis. What I consider a medically therapeutic ketogenic diet is getting back to those ratios where you have to, in order to maintain a certain threshold level of ketosis, to have a beneficial effect on whatever medical condition you have, be it epilepsy, cancer, whatever. Some people must follow a diet that is a 4-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio, meaning 4 times as much fat to combined carbs and protein, or 3 times as much fat to combine carbs and protein. And that is very, very difficult to maintain.
Is that like the 20 grams or less of carbs kind of thing? Or would that even be
I
less?
guess because it's ratios, it
Right.
depends. So the more fat you have, the more carbs and protein you have, because that ratio will stay the same. But usually to be in ketosis, it would probably be certainly under 40. For some people, yeah, under 20 or 30. And it's not that. So when I say, dear young, healthy, fit people who don't feel well, stop following this medical diet, it's not that I think the ketogenic diet is unsafe in any way, or that there's people who shouldn't do it. But, not everybody does feel their best eating super, super low carb. And again, like going back to these ancestral populations who were healthy and well and physically fit, into old age, none of them were like deliberately aiming for this super strict ketogenic diet. So it's not that carbs are inherently pathological or dangerous. It's not that lentils and beets and parsnips and carrots are causing type 2 diabetes. I mean, when we start to go off that deep end, we're becoming as closed-minded and crazy as other nutritional camps that we might sort of disagree with. I think if somebody is already in a disease state, like type 2 diabetes, like, morbid obesity, if we want to call that a disease, like PCOS, like hypertension, then maybe you are at a point where your body can't really tolerate even the otherwise wholesome carbohydrates, like black beans and rutabaga and whatever. But it's not that those foods are necessarily causing these things in the first place. So I feel like there's so many very athletic, already lean, healthy young people who have either been scared into following a keto diet or who think they should follow a keto diet. And that's great if they're doing it right, if they're getting enough calories, if they're getting enough nutrients, getting enough salt. But a lot of them aren't, and they don't feel well. And I just, like, heaven forgive me for saying this, but I don't think it's the end of the world for those people to eat some more carbohydrate.
I do agree with that 100%, for sure. And another question that we had was, so a lot of people say that, like, you don't have to worry about calories when you're in a state of ketosis, or if you're low carb, you just don't have to worry about calories. Do you think that this is true?
Oh,
You kind of
this is
flipped the topic on you.
It's such a controversial issue. We're having a little argument. Well, not an argument. We're having a discussion about this on Twitter right now.
Oh, I love Twitter. It gets you in all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, I think for the most part, calories don't matter for most people who eat a low carb or ketogenic diet. And that's because for most people, and not all, we'll get to the exceptions in a minute, for most people, this way of eating helps regulate your appetite so well that you don't overeat, right? You're able to go 4, 5, 6 hours between meals without snacking. You don't feel the need to constantly be eating all day. And once you're having your meal, your steak and, broccoli or asparagus, whatever, once your plate is done, you're good to go. You get it from the table and you go do something else. A lot of the constant hunger and the overeating we have is from being on the blood sugar and insulin roller coaster all day, when it's sort of like these hormones hijack your appetite regulation, where we've all had this, right? Before any of us were low carb or paleo or whatever, you have a bagel and orange juice for breakfast and maybe some margarine or butter or something on that bagel. Maybe your breakfast was 400 calories or 500 calories, and 2 hours later you're starving. You want a granola bar, you want a muffin, you want a latte and a scone, but why are you hungry? You just ate 500 calories not that long ago. So I think low carb helps stop those issues, but it doesn't in everybody. And I do think there are some people who, even when the blood sugar and the insulin is better regulated, they have other more deep-seated issues with food, whether it's, food addiction or a binge eating issue. There's other, we don't always eat because of appetite. And so if somebody doesn't address those other things that cause them to eat, whether or not they're actually physically hungry, then they will overeat and they will eat, potentially thousands of extra calories a day. And in that case, I think you can get into trouble.
What might be causing somebody to, like, if somebody's eating a low carbohydrate diet and still having blood sugar issues, what might be causing that?
Could be, maybe some of them might be having too much carbohydrate where they're still activating the insulin response. Could be sleep issues, stress issues. We personally, I think diet has the biggest impact by far on all of that stuff, on glucoregulation and appetite and all that. But I can't deny the evidence that inadequate sleep, whether it's in quantity or quality of sleep, really messes with glucoregulation. Stress messes with it. So all the hormonal changes that happen when those things are out of whack could make you hungry. So I think that's an issue. I do think diet is the biggest thing, but if your diet is really on point and you're still having problems, I would look at some of that other stuff.
And stress could be like anything. Anything could be a stressor on the body, especially if you have underlying like gut infections too, or anything like that. Just any sort of stress on the body can like jack up cortisol. And if your cortisol is high for long periods of time, then it can cause crazy blood sugar issues too.
Yeah, or frankly, how do I say this? Like, everybody today is, or I shouldn't stereotype like that. Many people in the modern world are under an incredible amount of stress, but we've come to think of it as normal. like, well, I get up and like in 5 minutes I'm out the door, run into my work, and then I'm there all day and I hate my job and like all this stuff. We just think it's normal because it's common, right? Everybody feels this stressed out. Just because you think it's normal doesn't mean your body isn't having some kind of like pathological response to it. And I here's something for the audience. I mean, I don't know if your audience is mostly women or not, but even if it's not, to anyone out there who this sort of resonates with, I do get some clients whose diets are very good and their sleep is very good. And some of this other stuff is very good. And they're wondering why they still can't lose those last 10 pounds or why something else is still out of whack. And when you dig deep, you ask questions not just about the food, but about the lifestyle, about the condition of the home and the family. Some of these people, it's not a food issue. It's not a diet issue. And I tell these people, I love you. This isn't a food issue. You need a babysitter. You need a date night once a week. Or frankly, you need a divorce or you need a new job. There's something else in your life that's affecting you so deeply that has nothing to do with food. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And most people, this isn't addressed enough, I feel like, because like you said, you can see people that have the perfect diet and great sleep, but they're still having some sort of issue that's causing this like deep rooted level of stress within the mind and the body, manifesting other physical issues. And it could have been like a cycle that's been going on for a long, long time. And it's just now surfacing in the physical body. So I love that you dive into that with a lot of your clients too.
Well, and I tell them, this isn't a nutritional issue. Like I'm not qualified to help you with this. All I can do is bring your attention to it that I think this is an issue for you. And people, it's hard to hear that because it's much easier to change what you eat than it is to get a new job or to move to a new city. You know what I mean? It is easier. Yeah. And as difficult as it is to change your food, because it's not easy, but it's easier than changing some other huge thing that's in your life.
Yeah, agreed completely. I find that most people it's much easier for them to either head for a supplement or diet than actually address the harder things. So That's very true. I want to go back to the first thing you mentioned regarding the blood sugar dysregulation. He mentioned that sometimes people actually are just too high carb. Do you ever see people eating so many non-starchy vegetables that is making them higher carb? Like there's this whole, everybody says, oh, low carbs, eat as many non-starchy vegetables as you want. Is it possible for that to cause blood sugar dysregulation?
I never say never, but I can't say I've seen that.
Okay.
I can't say that I've seen that.
So then in that situation, is it just like you find that they're including starches just a little bit too often, or?
I think when you really ask people questions, the stuff comes out. It reveals itself through the conversation. Mm-hmm. And frankly, there's a lot of people who have what I call that carb creep. Like they're talking, oh, well, here's my diet. I have 3 eggs for breakfast and a pile of spinach. And then for lunch, I have, 3 ounces of salmon and a salad. Oh, but then, Saturday was my boyfriend's birthday and I had 1 slice of pizza. And then, on Wednesday, we went out to dinner and I just had a roll. And that's that little carb creep that, again, some people have a higher tolerance. They could eat that and it's no problem. There's other people who have those little carb creeps, and those carb creeps might not even be that big a problem, except that they're still in this LCHF mindset, low carb, high fat. So they've sort of like let these carbs creep back in inadvertently. They don't realize how much it is, but they're still eating such a high fat diet. And then you end up on the standard American diet, which is high carb, high fat.
Yeah. Well, okay. Can we talk about the low carb, high fat thing really quickly? We've talked about the low carbohydrate, but what do you consider high fat?
I don't know that I could put a number on it. It's kind of like, I guess I think of like LCHF kind of like one step removed from keto, where you're maybe not like weighing and measuring all your food, but you feel like you have to add fat to all your food in order to make it higher fat. Like, so if you're having a steak and eggplant and zucchini or something, your steak probably already has a little fat cap on it, but you might melt a pat of butter on top of it or melt blue cheese on top of it. Not because it's delicious, but because you think you need to put more fat on it.
Okay, that makes sense. And that kind of almost seems like what keto is. Like, I think a lot of people would call that keto also. So there's like confusion, I feel like, between low carb and keto, but you're saying keto is just even lower carbohydrate ranges.
What you with that ketogenic is lower carbohydrate?
Yeah, because you said like low carb, high fat would be like if you're having like vegetables and steak and then you're adding more fat, but would keto be that just minus the more carbohydrates?
Yeah, I think keto is even lower carb, and for some people, they also do have to limit their protein intake.
Okay,
They have
interesting.
to they have to like keep the protein low. But I just think people people think they have to follow this
Like cookie cutter thing.
yeah, like they think they okay, ketogenic diet. So they go online and they research and they come across some epilepsy website where they're talking about this 4-to-1 ratio and eating gobs and gobs of fat and worrying about how much protein. And those are the people that come to me who can't lose weight.
Hmm.
And frankly, like I'm not trying to celebrate the Atkins diet or anything just because that's how I started, but Dr. Atkins wrote his first book in 1972, and that was before fat bombs were a thing. It was before MCT oil. It was before we had these home ketone meters. It was before any of this, and people did great. And Atkins had no limit on protein, and he certainly wasn't shy about encouraging people to use butter and heavy cream and cheese and olive oil, but there was no particular emphasis on like loading up on it.
Yeah.
And people did great. Maybe some people did have to like tailor things here and there for their own individual situation, but it's kind of like we said at the beginning, it's so wonderful that low carb and ketogenic diets have become so popular, but because they've been become so popular, for every piece of really good, accurate information there's like four pieces of nonsense that have to be waded through first.
Jeez. Yeah, that's so true. But like you're saying, it doesn't, and I think that is where the ketogenic and low carb space is headed, that this is not like a cookie cutter customizable, here are your macros ketogenic diet, because we're starting to discover that everyone has a different carb tolerance. Like some people can stay in a state of ketosis at like 100 grams of carbs, which is cool, I guess, if you have
Yeah.
that good of a carb tolerance. And we're moving towards that kind of thing instead of just following this like medical ketogenic diet, because I feel like that's what everyone starts out on, is that like super low carb ratio and then eating like 80 to 90% of your diet from fat, and that's not always the answer. So finding what does work for you is great. And I like that's why you're putting out information like this, so you can say, okay, well, maybe you do need more protein and less fat, or you do need a little bit more carbohydrate. You don't need to always be in a state of ketosis. So I like that you're pointing all of that out.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate you saying that about the carbohydrate tolerance to actually be in ketosis really varies.
Yeah.
Some people do need to stay under 20 or 30 grams a day, and some people you'll see it on like Instagram or social media, and it's usually young, athletic, fit males, but you will see some people eating 80, 90 grams of carbohydrate and they'll post their ketone meter and their ketones are 2.5. I could never do that, but they can.
Yeah, I couldn't even like get into ketosis with like 50 grams. It's like my body just didn't want to be there.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's crazy. And okay, so can you talk a little bit? I know we talked about protein as well. So what's the deal with gluconeogenesis?
Oh my gosh.
It's this
Mm.
it's this big thing that's being thrown out there, and we did talk a little bit about how like not necessarily like the protein amounts, kind of don't matter for some people, but some people may need to moderate their protein. So is gluconeogenesis just being really hyped right now, or is it really a thing that's holding people back?
It's a thing in that it is a biochemical process that exists, but it is being hyped, like
Right.
overhyped as this huge scary thing. And this is why people are afraid to eat protein because they think it's going to turn into sugar.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gluconeogenesis literally means the making of new sugar. And it comes from a lot of different starting compounds. One of the starting compounds is amino acids that come from protein. But, another substrate to make glucose is the glycerol backbone of fatty acids, of fats, but you never hear anybody worried about that when they're putting 4 tablespoons of coconut oil in their coffee. So it's, again, we'll have to link my gluconeogenesis blog post in the show notes, because it's like, I could talk for an hour just about that. But yes, is there a biochemical process by which amino acids can be converted into glucose? Yes. Does it happen just because you eat chicken breast? No. It happens when the body needs glucose. And frankly, we would all be dead. You could not do a ketogenic diet or low carb diet if gluconeogenesis didn't exist. Gluconeogenesis is the reason that you could eat 0 carbohydrate if you wanted to, and you would be fine, because your body would make your body needs glucose. There's a reason your blood sugar never goes to 0. Your body needs glucose, your brain needs glucose, but that doesn't mean that you need to eat carbohydrate. Because of, thanks to gluconeogenesis, we can create that glucose out of other things. And it's not a mass action thing. It doesn't happen like just because you eat a lot of protein, that protein is automatically going to be converted into sugar. People don't realize that protein, like we said earlier, it's not just muscles. It's your hair, your skin, your nails, your bones, your tendons, your ligaments, every single enzyme in your body. A lot of the peptide hormones come from amino acids. It's like, I don't know where this protein fear came from. It's just, and if you must maintain a state of ketosis all the time, you probably do need to keep an eye on your protein intake. Most people doing a low carb diet for some other reason don't need to do that.
Yeah. And like you're saying, like, you don't need to be 0 carb. Like, you don't need, just because your body physiologically like can run off of no carbohydrates does not mean it's necessarily like good for you and you're going to feel awesome. But physiologically you can do that. But I know it's not the answer for a lot of people. But okay, we've grilled you a lot, but I have one more question before we hop off, and that is about sweeteners. So what do you think about stevias and sugar alcohols? Do you think they have a place in a low carb diet? And like, my personal opinion is I would rather people have natural sugars from honey and maple syrup. That's just my personal opinion, but I love to know other people's views. Are you into those types of sweeteners?
I am. And this podcast has been so interesting because I feel like I'm saying so many unpopular or controversial things, but
we love
use
yeah, we love it.
I use stevia and like call the food police right now. I use Sweet and Low and I use Splenda.
Really?
I do.
You don't notice anything? Like,
no, they have not interfered with fat loss. They don't, for me anyway, as an individual, they don't mess with my appetite. Like, it's not like if I have a pack of Sweet and Low in my coffee, then I'm craving a donut. Like, that doesn't happen for me. I think it does happen for some other people. You have to know yourself. If you feel like, well, the minute I taste something sweet, even if it's from fake sweetener, like fake sugar, then I want more and more. If that's you, then you need to stay away from it. If someone else can have, some stevia in their tea or like a fat bomb made with Splenda or erythritol or something, then that's fine. I think supposedly erythritol is the one that has the least impact on blood sugar and insulin. All the other sugar, like xylitol and maltitol, they do have a very, very small effect. And it may be that some people are more sensitive to them than others. I think, again, like I hate to sort of play both sides of this, but there are some people who, when they do get that sweet sensation, even if it's from a sugar alcohol or something, they crave more and more and more. If, on the other hand, there are people who, if they have that little bit of sweet, whether it's from, Splenda or saccharin or whatever, and that satisfies them, all they need is a little bit in a sugar-free, like in a low, like an almond flour muffin or some kind of like low carb keto cake type concoction. They have that, and that keeps them on plan.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
like, yeah, if they have a choice between that or eating a pint of Ben and Jerry's, then my God, have the keto cake with the erythritol or with the Splenda, whatever. But
Yeah.
that's, I know that's super, super heretical and controversial, so people can just stone me if they want to, but I'm not a food purist. I'm not.
That's okay. I mean, I'm realizing that my side of things definitely is because when I have something sweet that's coming from like stevia or an artificial sweetener, because it's like so sweet to me, it makes me crave more sweetness. So I would
Hmm.
honestly rather just eat some honey or like a teaspoon of maple syrup or whatever in my coffee and have it be real sugar, and it just satisfies me in a different way. So like, and it doesn't make me want to keep coming back for more and more and more. So like you said, kind of knowing yourself and where you stand with sugar and just the taste of sweetness is pretty important.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fine. Like, again, people really vary in their carb tolerance. If you're talking literally a teaspoon or even a tablespoon throughout the day of real sugar or maple syrup or honey or molasses, it's really not that big a deal. A teaspoon of sugar is, I think, 4 grams of carbs.
Yeah,
And if
people
that's
act like it's
all,
going to kill you.
yeah,
Yeah.
like if that's all the sugar, like, okay, they're going to freak out about that, but it's totally fine to put 3 or 4 tablespoons of butter in your cup of coffee. I mean, come on.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, I think we blew through all of our questions. That was a lot, but wow, it was an awesome podcast. I love we just love how you're like straight up and just sharing your opinion, and we really really appreciate that because that's why we are Straight Up Paleo. We just want people to hear straight up, non cookie cutter advice, and you've definitely done that. So we really appreciate you being here.
Well, I appreciate you letting me rant. I feel like I got a little bit angry, but it's nice to be able to talk about these issues in real terms and for real people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's so helpful. And again, we just really appreciate you. You are such a wealth of knowledge. And for anybody who hasn't checked out her blog, definitely check it out. So, can you maybe remind our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah, my blog is Tuit Nutrition. It's TUIT nutrition.com. And I've actually written a book about using low carb diets for Alzheimer's disease. That's called the Alzheimer's Antidote, and you can find that on Amazon.
Amazing. And you're also active on Twitter, right?
I am on Twitter. My handle is Tuit Nutrition.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again so much for joining us today. This was very enlightening, and I know it's going to help so many people, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, talk to you soon.